Chapter 22. Level Up. As he got out into the hallway to see them, Harry determined that his friends hadn't leveled up, but had retained their memories. Harry was hoping it was only that they hadn't quite gotten enough side quests to match him after his work during the summer, and would level soon. 800 XP was a lot compared to his level 2 quests, but seemed like it might be a little low for a level 20 monster, so he was figuring that it was just his split of the total spread across the whole party. It seemed a little unfair if they'd missed out just because they were unconscious. "Let's get the lot of you to the headmaster's office before any more looky-loos," Dawlish ordered, having bound Lockhart's hands behind him with magical ropes and put a powerful locking charm on the bathroom door to seal the crime scene. "He's got the only working flue for me to take this one in, and he'll probably want to have a chat about." He just vaguely gestured at the bathroom. "Marauders, active, Harry Potter. So you all missed a lot on the slow walk up to the 7th floor, where Dumbledore kept his office." Harry silently used the guild chat to catch everyone up on what they'd missed. The procession almost crashed to a halt when Harry got to them, nearly being obliviated by Lockhart. Lee had nearly put his foot into a trick step at the distraction of being told he'd almost had his memories erased. And Hermione couldn't help it but burst out with, "Your books. Did you do all those things, or did you just take credit from other people and erase their memories?" She'd been doing some extracurricular research to try to prove Lockhart wasn't a total fraud, just enough to prove that some of the events in his books had really happened, but that none seemed to have clear corroboration of his heroics. That is," Lockhart sputtered, glancing back at Dawlish and narrowly avoiding the trick stare himself. "Do I have to answer that?" "Not to them. But I think our prosecutors are going to be very interested in the answer," the aura said, as Lockhart's face blanched. "Nice deduction, miss." He also mentally filed away the strange timing of the accusation, but figured the simplest explanation was that the Potter kid had very quickly explained the highlights to his friends while Dawlish was securing the bathroom. Harry summed up the rest, including that he had leveled, but they hadn't yet, by the time they hit the 7th floor. Ron Weasley replies, "That's all a lot. But you need to choose your perks. How many'd you get?" Harry hadn't even checked. He glanced at his character sheet and answered. Reply to Ron Weasley, "I got 2. Ron Weasley replies, "Well, that's one mystery solved. Guess we get 2 per level." Finish off agility and willpower. Reply to Ron Weasley, "I don't know. I was really thinking about Faye so I can do Luna's quests." Ron Weasley replies, "I know, mate, but you've got years for that. You at least need to raise one of them to 20 and see if you can raise it further." Reply to Ron Weasley, "Fair point. I need to see Dumbledore. It's an emergency," Dawlish announced to a large, ugly gargoyle guarding an otherwise nondescript section of wall. It nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the request, and then, about a minute later, shuffled aside. The wall behind it split open, not unlike the bricks of the entrance to Diagon Alley, revealing a spiral staircase that went up. "Right. You lot stay here. I'm sure the headmaster will send for you when we're done, and I may have follow-up questions when I'm back." "Do we need a solicitor?" Lee asked warily, unconsciously putting the emphasis in a way that indicated he knew Lockhart had asked for one. Dawlish filed that away as well, but shrugged. "You can at least have a teacher or guardian present." The more that they asked such astute questions, the more he began to suspect that he might need to arrest them someday. He didn't like the way they kept glancing at each other, like they knew each other well enough that they could pass information with just a look. Reminded him of some of the tighter groups of criminals he'd encountered, or crack aura teams, which could be just as dangerous when dealing with teenagers. "Anyway, stay put," he instructed again, and then pushed Lockhart onto the stairs ahead of him. Harry, Hermione, and Ron gasped slightly at the stairs, then animating to carry them up like an escalator. This was, of course, not the older boys' first trip to the headmaster's office, so they weren't surprised. As soon as the 2 men were clear, the wall reassembled itself, and the gargoyle shifted back into its guard position. Fred gestured at his ear, then the gargoyle, then upstairs. "Marauders. Active, Harry Potter. The gargoyle passes information to the headmaster." The 3 older boys nodded. It made sense with what Dawlish had done, but it was good information to keep them from saying too much out loud. "Marauders. Active, Harry Potter. Okay, should we get our stories straight?" While he relayed everyone's suggestions across the Marauders chat, Harry popped his character sheet back open and engaged the level-up dialogue. Of the two attributes, agility was the no-brainer, and he selected gymnast again. With a flash of lights only he could see, that took his agility to 20. Agility 20 bonus activated. Effortless dodge sure enough. Gymnast had turned grey and wouldn't let him select it again. Marauders, active Harry Potter, looks like 20 in an attribute is the maximum, and you get a bonus power when you hit it. Marauders, active Harry Potter. Anyway, I think we should just say Ron figured out I was a Parselmouth when I mentioned the zoo to him. Harry now had a crisis. Stoic or Fey. He wasn't totally sure what maxing out willpower would do for him, but he also wasn't sure whether seeing the weird creatures Luna could was really worth more. After all, they didn't seem to do anything for her other than make everyone think she was crazy. Would the perk just make him one of a pair of weird kids talking about gulping plimpies and nargles? Another creature she'd brought up when they ran into her in the library. Feeling vaguely like he was betraying the girl, he went with Ron's suggestion and took Stoic. Willpower 20 bonus activated. Mental Fortress, he resolved that he would take Faye next time, which might be sooner than another year at the rate he was triggering main quests. Between maxing out his willpower and leveling up, Harry's magical stamina had gone from 270 to 350, which seemed like a pretty big bump. His hit points and endurance had also gone up a bit. He wondered if all willpower did was affect his stamina scores and whatever mental fortress was, or whether it was giving him other benefits. To be fair, since he'd raised it that summer, he did seem to be having an easier time motivating himself to do his homework instead of messing around playing games with Ron. But that could just as easily be the game rewards. Before he could agonize over it too much further, but after everyone had more or less gotten on the same page, the gargoyle stepped aside again and motioned them into the reopened stairway. With 6 of them, they had to walk in a little further before the stairs started whisking them upwards and the wall closed behind. It turned out that a spiral escalator was a lot more dizzying than one of the conventional straight ones Harry had taken in the rare times Aunt Petunia had taken him to Woolworths for items he couldn't just get handed down from Dudley. The stairway decanted them onto a stone, landing in front of a torchlit oak door with a brass griffin knocker. Before they could choose who would knock, the door opened silently into what must be Dumbledore's office. They'd know it, even if the man himself weren't sitting at the desk across from the door. Harry, Hermione, and Ron all marveled at the circular tower room packed full of interesting magical apparati, bookshelves, and portraits. Fred, George, and Lee shared a look of amusement at the kids gawking, forgetting that they'd done the same the first time they'd been there, dragged by their ears by McGonagall. She conjured an extra floating hand so she could get all 3 of them at once. "I understand you have quite the story," the headmaster said, with a twinkle, though he wasn't fully able to form a grandfatherly smile. A basilisk had just been slain, and a professor had almost obliviated Harry Potter, and he'd had no inkling of any of it in advance. "Please have a seat." He gestured with his wand and conjured up an overly wide and overstuffed couch, upholstered in eye-watering magenta and green floral chintz. The kids packed into it a little snugly, unconsciously arranging themselves, so Harry was directly in front of Dumbledore, with Fred and George on his left and Ron, Hermione, and Lee on his right. The headmaster seemed inclined to wait for the kids to start talking to fill the silence, but between Harry's new willpower score and the twins' advice to never volunteer information, that strategy didn't work. After a minute and a half of uncomfortable staring at one another, he started with, "Can you lead me through the events that made you aware of the Chamber of Secrets?" Harry nodded. "Of course, sir. A house elf showed up at my house over the summer. He was trying to keep me from coming to Hogwarts because he had heard something bad was going to happen this year and I'd be in danger. It came out that what he was worried about was the Chamber of Secrets. That nicely left out that Harry had suggested the term to Darby rather than vice versa after reading it off his quest log. A house elf was able to find you at your home. Dumbledore's eyebrow rose. He had not been aware of that flaw in the wards. Well, the elf may have only been permitted since his goal was to help Harry, but it was still something that might be exploited. Do you know whose? The Malfoy's elf, Darby, sir. Harry nodded. We saw him with them at the train platform. I think he overheard something Mr. Malfoy was planning over the summer. It was hard to get much from him, since he kept having to punish himself if he came close to saying anything bad about his family. He sounds abused. Hermione couldn't help but interject. We have to figure out how to get him away from that terrible situation. The old man nodded sadly, well aware of how some purebloods treated their house elves. There is not much legal way to free a house elf, short of their master giving them clothing. It's a sign of dismissal. He saw the idea of tricking Malfoy into giving the elf clothes flicker across the faces of the students, and nodded, then continued. So this Darby warned you of the Chamber of Secrets, and you suspected it had to do something with his household. But then, the first weekend back, Harry continued, I heard something in the walls talking about ripping, tearing, and killing, but Hermione and Ron just heard hissing. I followed it back to around Myrtle's bathroom, where we lost it. Again, not mentioning how much of an aid the map was in tracking it, or the chat log in making him sure he wasn't going crazy. We figured that only I'd heard it because I'm a Parselmouth. Ah, the headmaster nodded, as if he considered that within the realm of possibility. When did you learn you had this gift? Harry shrugged. I've talked to snakes before. One at the zoo one time. I kind of figured out that everyone could do it, until I found out it was rare. Ron knew what it meant. I haven't spread it around because people think it's dark. It often is, Dumbledore confirmed. In fact, it would not surprise me if it is a power you won from Voldemort. The Weasleys around him tensed nervously at the name, but failed to gasp. He is the only other modern speaker in Britain that I'm aware of. He's the heir of Slytherin. Hermione leaped boldly at the conclusion. Was he a student here, sir? Did he work on the bathrooms back when Myrtle died? Indeed he did. A single white eyebrow rose as the young witch's deductive abilities grew in his estimation, and he decided to reveal a bit more information. While he likes to hide his origins, I am quite certain that one Tom Marvolo Riddle eventually changed his name to the general public. He flicked his wand at the edge of his desk and conjured small, standing letters in green metal to spell out the name, then flicked it again to have them spell out, I am Lord Voldemort. There's a cup in the trophy hall for him, Ron realized. One for special services, the headmaster nodded sadly. That service being turning in our own Hagrid for the attacks. But, Hermione almost yelled, if you've known all this time that he went on to become Lord Voldemort, the twitch of the couch was less after the second naming so close in succession. Why didn't you clear Hagrid's name? It was clearly him. Sadly, he went to such an extent to hide his origins that I never had enough proof for the ministry, Dumbledore frowned. An anagram and an old man's recollections of a troubled student are not sufficient legal proof. But now that we've killed the basilisk and can use the body to prove it wasn't Hagrid's spider, Harry asked. The old man nodded. I'm pleased your thought at this time is for your friend, not the glory. I shall see to it. But please, you have told me of the 2 pieces of information you had. Harry shrugged. We did a bunch of research. Hermione and Ron found out about the basilisk. Luna Lovegood got us thinking about it maybe having to do with the founders. We mentioned it to Hagrid, and that got us the year. And we eventually figured out that Myrtle was the girl who died and asked her about it. He gave it a beat and then laid out. With all of that, it was just working out that the broken sink in front of where she died was a secret door with a password that only a Parselmouth could say, and bringing the rooster. I see, yes. Hagrid did mention that you'd borrowed his rooster, though he believed it was for a prank on your friends, he gestured at the older Weasleys. When that failed to elicit an apology for the deception, he moved on to, what I don't understand is why you didn't explain this to him, a teacher, or myself, before taking it upon yourselves to slay the beast. Would anybody really have believed us with just the little information we had? Harry fired back. Ah, the sad exclamation dropped into the room like a lead weight. You still feel badly done by Minerva not believing you about the threat to the stone. Harry glanced around at his friends for support and admitted, I mean, it wasn't really her fault because we had the wrong suspect, and I realized he couldn't have actually gotten the stone without me there, so it was pretty protected. But maybe. The headmaster calculated quickly. He didn't want to punish Harry for doing heroic deeds on his own initiative, rather to encourage it. Truly, his only objection to this whole affair was that he'd been completely blindsided by it, so wouldn't have been available to step in if the boy had been overwhelmed by the danger. and he was honestly impressed that the trio of second years had added the three older troublemakers to their circle. While most of the teachers were aghast at the twins' antics, no doubt with Lee Jordan's organizational support, they very much reminded Dumbledore of Harry's father and his friends. And that kind of cleverness, properly channeled, had only been an asset in the last war. Well, at least until Black had turned. That reminded and decided the old man, who explained, "I hope to re-earn your trust in the future if it has been broken. Rest assured that any suppositions of yours that reach my ears will be taken seriously. And when I am in residence, you may inform me of dangers you have perceived. I believe you saw how to request admittance to the gargoyle." The children looked a bit mollified, so he suggested, "It's close to curfew, so you should head back to your dormitory. I shall consider proper point awards for this endeavor on the morrow, once I've had the opportunity to observe the scene. Well, actually, if I could ask Harry to remain behind. I have some information to share that he may choose to disclose to you all later, but which I believe should remain private for now. Marauders. Active, Harry Potter. Don't worry. I'll let you know." Everyone nodded and headed out, leaving Harry alone on the couch. As the door shut behind them with finality, he wondered whether he was actually going to learn some secrets, or whether the headmaster wanted to chew him out in private, and he wasn't actually sure which he felt like he deserved. Chapter 23. Suggest. "I'm afraid I have some other information to discuss with you," Dumbledore started, once Harry had a few moments to stew after his friends had left the room. "It regards how you must be more cognizant of danger with Sirius Black on the loose." "Oh, I'm not worried about that." Harry heaved a sigh of relief. He was worried that he might be getting in trouble for using his new powers. "You aren't." The old man gave him a perplexed, yet piercing look, and then blinked in confusion. Until Fortress activated, Harry responded with a similar confused look, wondering what the game system was trying to tell him about, but managed to carry on with what he'd meant to say. "I think Sirius is innocent." "How have you come to such a conclusion?" the headmaster asked, still wrong-footed by his wandless legilimency probe being so easily thwarted. Certainly, it was a bit harder than most when he'd passively skimmed Harry's thoughts in the past, but now it was like he was hitting a brick wall. He'd have to consult with Severus to discuss what might have changed. Could defeating a basilisk somehow afford such protection? Harry had been working on his explanation for what he knew about Sirius, so said, "I've talked with Remus Lupin about it," hopefully implying that they'd exchanged letters, and if anyone was the spy, it would make more sense for it to be Pettigrew. "I was unaware that you two had become acquainted," Dumbledore boggled. How much was going on in the young man's life that he was unaware of? While indeed, of your father's close friends, Sirius Black seemed the least likely to turn traitor, there is nonetheless the evidence to consider. "What evidence, sir?" Harry pushed back. In his continuing talks with Sirius, he was growing concerned with the fact that his godfather had never had a trial and seemed to have been locked away on what Hermione referred to as highly circumstantial evidence. Did he get a trial? Did anyone check his wand with that spell that Aura Dawlish used on Lockhart's wand to see if he'd blown up the street? Did they even interview him? The white beard puckered as the old man pursed his lips, considering. I'm not actually sure of any of that, but I'm guessing you've been doing some additional reading." He furiously racked his brain and couldn't actually remember there being a trial. At the time, he'd been exhausted from the war and less willing to question it, since the silver lining of Black's arrest was that he wouldn't be taking his godson and making them both a target. "We have the papers in the library, sir," Harry nodded. Hermione had demanded to see them until she was sure that Sirius wasn't playing them. "Why would you think he wanted to kill me? Didn't he take me from our house as a baby and give me and his motorcycle to Hagrid?" Harry had finally figured out why that transportation quest goal had already come checked, after asking Sirius about it. The headmaster removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. How had he missed that? He tried to explain. "You see, your family was protected by a powerful charm. Voldemort wouldn't have been able to find you without the secret keeper willingly giving you up." Remus mentioned that. Harry nodded. He sort of had, when questioned about why he'd believed Sirius was the traitor for so long. "I think they switched, told the world it was Sirius, and then chose someone else they thought wouldn't be as much of a target." Obviously, Sirius had explained as much, but Harry wasn't ready to reveal that, so he chanced a lie. I think I have some memories of Uncle Peter coming over when I was little, all by himself. Deception check succeeded. While Albus Dumbledore was perhaps one of the most insightful people on the planet, he notably boosted that talent with near-constant wandless legilimency and also had no reason to expect Harry Potter to lie to him. And the story made sense. But Sirius Black killed Peter Pettigrew. He grasped at the final straw he had left. Hit him with a blasting curse so powerful that it disintegrated him with nothing left but a single finger that looked like it had been cut off, Harry paraphrased from the articles. Or Peter cut his finger off and ran away. The spectacles were just lying upside down on the desk now, as the headmaster had his face fully in his hands in shock, blocking out visual stimulus to call up his occlumency and rack his brain for any further evidence. There was none. Regarded with even a child's simple reading of the news articles, Occam's razor would, in fact, suggest that Sirius Black had been framed, and he'd allowed it to happen to one of his best students and most reliable agents of the last 20 years, because he needed control of Harry Potter. He still needed control of Harry Potter, more than ever with the shade of Tom Riddle possessing professors and the Malfoys unleashing plots to continue their Dark Lord's work as a student. But could he consign an innocent man to the Dementors to get it? Perhaps there was some way to square that circle. After all, even if Sirius was innocent, after so many years in prison, he was probably not fit to be a guardian for a child. I believe you may be correct, Harry, he finally admitted, removing his hands with an absent fluff of his beard and carefully placing his spectacles on his face. I'm sorry that you saw me in such a state. It is not like me to come to such a flawed conclusion, and I needed a moment to think through the details. If Sirius is, indeed, innocent, then we do not need to worry about you being threatened by him. Though I suppose we should worry about where Peter Pettigrew has gone these years past. Harry didn't feel like opening the can of worms that was explaining they were all illegal animagi, and that Pettigrew had been living as the Weasley pet rat until he recently ran away. Wormtail was quite likely out of reach even for the headmaster anyway. Instead, Harry reminded him, we still have to worry about the heir of Slytherin, sir. After all, the proof of that was still staring at him out of his quest log. Someone else that could speak to snakes had to call it up that first night I heard it. Why, dear boy, that was Tom Riddle himself, Dumbledore absently explained. I think it likely that he was, through a bit of a circuitous route, descended from Salazar, and that's how he came by being a Parselmouth. As far as I know, there are no other living descendants. The Malfoys must have found one, Harry shrugged. Or is the wraith from last year still somewhere in the castle? He shivered involuntarily at that, flashing back to the night when he'd found the dead unicorn. Or some other method, the headmaster admitted. Yet what kind of magic could allow Lucius to duplicate Parseltongue? I shall look into it. Please, inform me if you find any evidence as to who or what it could be. Harry nodded. They weren't seriously considering Ginny anymore, so he didn't mention that. Otherwise, they'd been very focused on killing the snake, and hadn't planned to then have to deal with a hidden boss controlling it. So should I. He began to intimate that he'd like to go back to the dorms. Ah, yes, I think. But before Dumbledore could dismiss him, his fireplace flared green, and a three-dimensional representation of Dawlish's head appeared. Can I come back through? The Aura's voice asked. Harry was impressed by how the fire moved along with the man's face, while still looking like fire. The headmaster waved his wand at the fireplace and said, Yes, John, the connection is open again. With a flare of green flames, John Dawlish appeared in the office. What Harry had taken to be some kind of weird decoration made of red feathers suddenly moved, poking a head from beneath what was a wing as the old bird peered in annoyance at his sleep being disrupted. The Aura clocked that Harry was in the room and nodded. Good. I have follow-up for Potter. I've already interviewed him, and will recount what he and his friends told me. You can schedule anything else for after he has gotten his sleep, and with myself or Minerva present, Dumbledore corrected. Fine, Dawlish shrugged. I caught Lockhart in the act, so we won't need him to testify. Follow-up is for clarity. A fully political policeman, he knew not to alienate the chief warlock or the boy who lived until he absolutely had to. He was a little suspicious that this posting was the minister playing some kind of game with John Dawlish as one of the pieces, so it was when, not if. That reminds me. The old man gave him a grandfatherly smile. You have the first years for the 2 morning periods tomorrow, and I'll assist you with the newt classes either side of lunchtime until you get your feet under you. What? The aura asked, completely nonplussed. Making a face like it was obvious, Dumbledore explained, well, you've just arrested my defense professor, John, and I know you're more than qualified, given the marks you had in school and what you must have learned as an aura. I'm not here to teach students. I'm here to protect the school from convicts and manage the Dementors, Dawlish argued. That surely won't take much of your time, with Sirius Black not spotted anywhere near here. And what better way to protect the students than to teach them how to defend themselves? The headmaster said, and I'm sure the extra wages won't go amiss. I'll clear it with Cornelius in the morning. Dawlish frowned. The extra pay would be nice, with as strapped as the Aura department had been for raises recently, and being a teacher would embed him fully into the school the way that Fudge and Umbridge clearly wanted. But I'm not putting myself in front of that curse. Waving it away like it was not a concern, Dumbledore explained, if there even is such a thing, I could argue it has already struck for the year, with Gilderoy under arrest. And those that take the assignment on with an intention of it being temporary seem to have no difficulties. In fact, it may be very temporary, as Mr. Potter has just reminded me of another former student that I believe was working on his defense mastery. I'm just trying to handle the difficulty tonight's unfortunateness has caused me in a way that helps everyone. Fine. If the minister clears it, the younger man relented, knowing that it was probably a foregone conclusion. I'll walk Potter back to his dorm. A capital idea. See you at the staff table for breakfast, John. Minerva will have your schedule. He waved the both of them out of the room. They rode the staircase down in silence and began walking towards Gryffindor Tower. Be careful with that one, Dawlish cautioned Harry, as they walked past the tapestry of the dancing trolls. Notably, that stretch contained no portraits to report back to the headmaster, just a long section of oddly blank wall, and the large unmapped space beyond that still taunted Harry every time he walked past. Not as daft as he makes out. Still wondering about the mental fortress warning while he'd been talking to the headmaster, Harry asked. What do you mean? Meanwhile, he found it in the special abilities section of his character sheet, where it was described as, your willpower is so absolute, none can enter your mind without your permission. Well, that was worrying. He also glanced at effortless dodge, which explained, your great agility allows you to dodge attacks tirelessly. He had noticed that dodging spells when practicing with Fred and George drained his endurance as he got tired of all the jumping around, eventually letting him get hit. If he could do that without wearing down, unaware of why the kid was distracted, but cognizant of the secondary objective to have the boy who lived on the minister's side if it ever became a political fight with the chief warlock, he said, man makes plans. Not always sure who he's making them to benefit, is all. I've been wondering why he didn't do more investigating of Lockhart before putting him in charge of kids. He really was a terrible teacher, Harry agreed. But everyone who reads his books thinks he's great, so we just figured he convinced the school. Maybe. Folded like a soggy fish and chips wrapper as soon as we got him into an interrogation room, though. Just in the 5 minutes I was there before coming back. We didn't even have to put any potions into him. Who knows what he's giving up to the team right now? Dawlish realized somewhere deep down that he probably wasn't a paragon of justice and righteousness, but he was cop enough to be profoundly offended that a man that was probably only not a dark wizard for lack of talent and ambition had been given oversight of children. Just seems like someone as insightful as Albus Dumbledore should have noticed that in the job interview. Harry nodded, still rattled by the idea that Dumbledore had done something that activated his mental fortress. He wondered if maybe he was actually immune to obliviation now that he had it, and what other magic went into your mind. I guess the last one was also a terrible teacher and was possessed by Lord Voldemort, and nobody figured that out either until I got him. True enough, the curse on the position means anyone sane won't take the job, so... What? Dawlish finally passed that statement the right way. We'd heard that Quirrell was probably a wannabe Death Eater, and died trying some particularly dark magic in the basement going after whatever the old man had hidden down there. But possessed? Yeah. Face on the back of his head. Why he wore the turban, Harry explained. honestly assuming that everyone basically knew about it. After all, Dumbledore had said that the whole school knew before he'd even woken up after the adventure with the stone. But how could the whole school know, unless Dumbledore had told them? It wasn't like Ron and Hermione were gossips, and even they didn't know what happened in the room with the mirror. Awful, Dawlish hedged, suddenly profoundly worried. Someone was pushing Fudge's buttons to get him assigned to the school to keep an eye on Dumbledore. Basilisks were coming up out of sinks, professors were using illegal mind magic on students, and other professors were walking around possessed. If the kid was to be believed, and if anyone would know, the boy who lived would, right? By the ghost of you-know-who himself. He'd known this was political when he agreed to come. But this simple job spying on Albus Dumbledore's little fiefdom might wind up being more than political. It might wind up being apocalyptic. And John Dawlish would do whatever it took to make sure his head did not get cursed off his shoulders. One unexpected dead basilisk, and the kid talking like he'd driven off the wraith of the worst Dark Lord of the age, as if it weren't a big deal, made the man wonder if the best way to look out for himself was to make sure that the boy who lived was on his side. "Night, kid. I'll probably see you in class," he allowed as he dropped Potter off at the portrait of the fat lady. He barely registered the sleepy nod and password as the boy went inside, as fast as his brain was going. You know, whose shade had possessed Quirinus Quirrell for a whole year, Dumbledore hadn't noticed or stopped it, and Harry Potter had probably banished him. Why didn't everyone know about this? Chapter 24. Target. The Marauders hadn't explicitly decided not to tell the school what had occurred with the Basilisk and Lockhart. However, they'd gotten in late and spent most of the rest of the evening, and then time before breakfast, silently listening as Harry explained everything that had happened after the rest of them had left the headmaster's office. Hermione didn't really get along with her roommates, but the news would have been far and wide if she had, since they were big gossips. Harry and Ron just didn't think about mentioning it to their roommates. Fred, George, and Lee didn't even have roommates, though the legend was they'd driven at least one other boy to ask to be resorted to get away from them in their first year. Consequently, the rumor mill wasn't churning by breakfast time. There was some curiosity about the new man at the staff table, looking very surly still at his new co-workers and duties. But Lockhart often slept in right up to his first class anyway, so his absence wasn't unusual. And the second-floor bathroom had an out-of-order sign on it, but that also was pretty common after Myrtle had a fit and wrecked the facilities. Everyone went off to morning classes none the wiser. By lunchtime, the gossip was starting to flow. All the first years and the sixth-year Newt class were discussing their new substitute for defense class. It seemed Dawlish had been close-lipped about why he was teaching the class instead of Lockhart. The first years were the least likely to have been nurturing a pubescent crush on the missing professor, so weren't too upset, though the worry was spreading through the older students that had enjoyed looking at the very pretty man. The Newt class seemed, on the whole, quietly ecstatic. They overheard both Percy and Oliver singing the praises of a class that finally had a useful practical component, and hoping that Dawlish would stick around long enough to help them with education that had been sorely lacking. Nobody thought to ask Harry or his friends about Lockhart's absence, as it didn't seem connected. It was dinner time before the whispers and looks really started. While none of the living that had been present had volunteered information, it seemed like Myrtle had half complained, half exulted about the dead snake in her bathroom. Also, the professors had been briefed. Some were inveterate gossips, and sometimes they talked to each other where students could be listening, or portraits, who were almost as bad. "Did you really kill a giant snake, Harry?" Colin Creevey demanded, fingers caressing his camera as if anxious to take a picture of Harry, the snake, or both. "No comment," Harry said, mostly because Colin was pretty tiresome, but then he felt like he couldn't talk about it the rest of dinner, and the others followed his lead. After dinner, however, it was Quidditch practice, and Oliver wanted answers. "Dead snake and Lockhart missing have anything Tito why each other?" he asked, in the boys' changing room as they were putting on their Quidditch armor. "Marauders. Active, Harry Potter. Anyone object to letting the Quidditch team know what happened?" Hermione Granger replies, "It's okay with me. We already told Ginny. She caught us in the common room after dinner and asked." Fred and George just shook their heads, so Harry figured that was close enough to a quorum to explain. Yeah, we got Slytherin's monster. He gestured to indicate he was including Fred and George in that group. It was a basilisk. Someone was planning to let it out of the Chamber of Secrets and do something terrible to the Muggle-born in the school, we think. He was quiet for a moment, then remembered the rest of the question. Oh, and yeah, Lockhart found us first and was going to try to remove our memories so he could claim he killed it. Maybe he did that for everything he took credit for in his books. Dawlish arrested him. Oliver just nodded consideringly and then said, Weel, Dawlish Disney really ken how tea teach, but tea least he kens things tea teach. And mib why, this year's adventure already handled, ye'll be able to focus on Quidditch. Yeah, I hope so. Harry placated the sports-focused older boy, not believing it for a second with two main quests still open in his log. All right, Katie, Oliver ordered as they all assembled out on the field. I want ye to act as if ye're the rival seeker tonight. We're teaching Harry to mark an opponent. Mark, Harry asked. He explained, the Malfoy boy's got the faster broom. If he sees the snitch afore ye, tea's over. Unless ye're marking, I am and can get there faster. I want ye to get used to keeping an eye on t'other seeker. Ye should be moving as soon as she is. Unless it's a feint, Angelina cautioned. Baby steps, Oliver shook his head. First he learns to target the other seeker, then he learns to guess if T's a feint. Target Katie. Got it, Harry nodded. And with that decision to choose a target, glowing green brackets appeared around her, right angle versus describing the corners of an invisible box around her. Really got it. As they lifted off the ground onto their brooms, Harry experimented with the new game feature, switching his target to each of his teammates. Each of them was bounded in green as he selected them, and whoever he targeted showed up as an extra bright dot on his map. Somewhere in the back of his head, he knew where they were, even if he looked away. It wasn't any effort at all to snap his head unerringly in the direction of his target. Releasing the balls now, Oliver warned, as he opened the case that contained the practice snitch, 2 bludgers and the quaffle. Target snitch, Harry checked. Sure enough, the targeting bracket snapped to the tiny golden ball. Instead of green for allies, it was blue-bordered for neutral targets, but nonetheless he had no trouble seeing it both in his vision and on his map. This can't be legal, he muttered to himself. When the snitch flew off to the opposite side of the pitch and should have been invisible at that distance, he could still see it no problem. The blue brackets remained locked onto the tiny ball. Marauders, active, Harry Potter, guys. I figured out I can make the snitch my target, and I can just see it, plain as day. Should I use this ability? Fred Weasley replies, yes, absolutely. George Weasley replies, 150 to 0. Ron Weasley replies, see if it can dodge enough to break your targeting. But yeah, wicked. Hermione Granger replies, it's an unfair game anyway. If Draco can buy his whole team better brooms, you can use your gift. Following Ron's advice, Harry let the snitch move around the pitch, and he never lost it. He found out that if he switched his target back to another player, he did lose it, and couldn't immediately reacquire it. So that at least seemed a little fair. But as soon as he glanced back to where he'd last seen it and caught the glint of gold, he was able to snap the box back onto it. Year on fire tonight, Harry. Oliver approved, after Harry's third catch in a quarter of an hour. He was honestly taking it slower than he had to. How are ye finding the snitch so fast? Harry shrugged. Guess I just figured it out. That flash of gold is hard to miss. Keep it up. Those snakes aren't going to know what hit 'em. The older boy grinned, visions of the Quidditch Cup dancing in his head. After practice, Hermione, Ron, and Lee waved Harry and the twins over to a corner they'd claimed in the Gryffindor common room. We had a thought, Hermione began, once there was a bit of privacy. What if the heir had another heir? You were dark wizard sex, George held his nose. Evil baby, Fred added. He was supposed to be quite popular among that crowd, though, George considered. So many proper pureblood wives ready to have their Dark Lord's demons spawn, Fred allowed. Harry sighed and massaged his scar. It didn't hurt, it just felt like it should. So basically any of the kids of Voldemort's followers could actually be his kid, and that's who the heir is now. Well, not any of them, probably, Ron said. Probably not Malfoy. He looks too much like his dad. Oh, and they could only be first years or older because of when you sorta destroyed him as a baby. Technically, they could be a year younger than that, Hermione corrected. On the off chance that he did stuff with someone right before Harry dispersed him when Harry was 15 months old. That would be 9 more months, so they could be up to 2 years younger than Harry. They can't be, though, Ron corrected her correction, because we'd know if there was a 10-year-old in the castle running around letting the basilisk out. So it has to be a first year or older, because they're here. Yes, but you didn't think of that. You just forgot to add time for gestation, Hermione said, triumphantly. Honestly, Harry figured things couldn't be that bad if his best friends were back to arguing over trivialities. They seemed to be having a good time. But before it got too out of hand, he said, so it could be a first year or older. Maybe Mr. Malfoy told them about it over the summer. They could have not known their dad wasn't their real dad. But none of the Slytherins that are actually here have a Death Eater Guild tag. I've been checking, so it's a good idea, but I'm not sure it helps us figure out who it is. And as much as we love bagging on the snakes, Fred began, could be someone in another house too. George finished. Lee nodded. Pettigrew was in Gryffindor and turned. Could have been other non-snakes that were secretly dating you-know-who. We can at least eliminate the Muggle-born. Hermione tried, flummoxed that her theory didn't seem to have much predictive ability even if true. Not even all of them, Ron realized. Dean doesn't know who his actual dad is. Could be other kids that think their dad is a Muggle, but you-know-who was secretly having an affair with a Muggle woman? George asked. Dear Witch Weekly, Fred grinned, implying a salacious letter to the editor. Seeing that Hermione looked sad about all the holes that had been poked in her idea, Harry said, at least it gives us a place to start. If it's another kid at school that's Voldemort's heir, at least we don't have to worry about his wraith floating around. And it might be easier to fight a kid if we have to. Right, Hermione nodded. And I bet we can find out what Tom Riddle looked like. Maybe in the yearbooks. We might not be able to eliminate anyone except people that look exactly like their fathers, but we can probably mark people that don't look anything like Tom as probably not. Sad that means the only one we can rule out is Malfoy, Harry frowned. It would be simplest if it was him. Lee shook his head. If that kid was the heir of Slytherin, he'd work it into every conversation. Ron grinned and mimicked Draco's voice. Wait until my ancestor hears of this. I need to go find a portrait. I'm sure there's a large one around here of him. He was a founder, after all. Everyone laughed, but Hermione clearly had a realization and asked, are there any founders' portraits? I haven't seen any. A round of shrugs greeted the question. If anyone would know, it should have been her. I'll look it up, she decided. They chatted for a bit longer and headed off to bed. Just as he was laying down to sleep, Harry thought he saw a red dot appear nearby on his map, which he was leaving open as often as possible after the Lockhart debacle. But before he could zoom in to see who and where it was gone. He stayed up for another half an hour, waiting to see if it would show back up, eventually getting tired enough to decide that if it was something he should worry about, he'd get another chance. In the first-year girls' dorm, Tom Riddle's echo seethed within his diary. It had only been his phenomenal instinct for self-preservation that had kept him from following through with his momentary plan to march Ginny, Weasley, right over to Harry Potter's dorm and attempt to murder him in his bed. Even the second of possession had sent her right to sleep when he relinquished control. He'd learned from the girl that Harry Potter had slain his basilisk. He needed a new plan to make the boy pay.